Wisconsin Democrats just won back the Supreme Court in Wisconsin, and Republicans are going absolutely insane. They're panicking because the midterm 2022 red wave did not happen. It was a fake wave. It was fake news, and it was completely wrong. Poll aggregators are actually getting a lot of backlash now because what ended up happening was they relied on a lot of biased polls in their aggregation. Real Clear Politics 538, they relied on a lot of biased RD pollsters that were trash. And so now what we have going on is Republicans are just reeling because they're trying to figure out, oh my God, we keep losing elections. What the heck is going on here? What is the problem? So Scott Walker here is going to give us a breakdown. He's going to say it's young people. Check it out.
The larger issue here, we've seen it particularly in Wisconsin, but across the country, is younger voters. In Wisconsin last fall, we saw about a 40-point margin that younger voters gave to the Democrats running for Senate and governor. We saw similar margins in Pennsylvania. Part of the reason why you have John Fetterman in the U.S. Senate, in Arizona, in Georgia, and elsewhere. And just this week in Wisconsin, we don't yet know the numbers by age, but we do know that Dane County, which is where the University of Wisconsin's flagship campus is at, about 50,000 students are enrolled there. Dane County cast more ballots in the race for the Supreme Court than the largest county in the state, Milwaukee County. And in Dane County, 82% of those votes went for the radical. And so unless we turn young people around, and it's not as simple as one campaign ad or some sort of a coalition, this is years of liberal indoctrination coming home to roost, and we've got to turn it around if we're going to win again.
Analysis seems to be pretty interesting here. Basically, the Democrat wins, I guess, by 11 points, which is a stunningly massive margin. It turns into 4-3 Supreme Court wins. Now, his analysis is that the reason or the culprit for the Republican losses is because of younger voters is what he says. And so there's a lot of news going on about Gen Z, because they came out super heavily in favor of the Democrats in 2022. So they have heavily been given credit for it, although their rise in voting wasn't even actually that high. It was just like somewhat uptick, although I think it was a big uptick relative. I think it went from like 14 to 22% or something like that turnout wise. There's a lot to go. But what's really hilarious about this, first of all, we should say that I'm not exactly sure if the reason why they won this election, why the Wisconsin Supreme Court won this election, was because of either young people or abortion. And I'm going to be covering this in another video, because Republicans are now panicking because their abortion views are unpopular. And nobody took the Republicans seriously on this because Roe versus Wade made it feel that long-term standing precedent of 70 years or something like that, that stare decisis. Everyone thought that stare decisis was going to stick and it's going to hold. So, hey, even if these Republicans are going crazy on abortion, that stare decisis of, Roe versus Wade, the precedent is going to hold, it's going to stay. Well, spoiler alert, it didn't. It's gone. In the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization Supreme Court case, landmark ruling, Roe versus Wade has now been overturned. So now people are like, oh shit, that was real. So there's a huge backlash to this. And so polling data shows that a super majority of people, which polling-wise, that's a significant support in favor of abortion. In most cases, it should be legal, over 60%. And so now politically, they're running into a lot of issues because that's actually a really unpopular position for them. It would have like the stealth thing where it was able to mobilize religious voters, but it simultaneously did not mobilize people against them as much because people thought that the longstanding precedent was going to hold. So I'm unclear as to whether his analysis is even correct here. Now, as a general trend, obviously young voters are going to be going against Republicans. A study has shown that like the millennial generation is poorer than the preceding generation. I think this is the first time this happened in American history. And so, or something like that. I don't know if that's exactly true. Don't quote me on that exactly. But as a result of that, they're not becoming more conservative as they age. Whereas typically generations become more conservative as they age. However, it's not because really their age necessarily, it's because of the money, the dough, the wealth. You get a home, you become more conservative. You support lower tax policy on rich people because now you're rich. Now you want lower property tax because you have property, etc., right? Well, it's not happening for millennials because they broke boys. Millennials are broke boys. In this economy, you want to cop an egg? That's $20, son. You need a lot of dough for that. And guess what? You ain't making it. And so that's just kind of the way it's going right now, right? But I find it hilarious the way he's doing this. It's like, oh, like the radical and oh, the liberal indoctrination and all this stuff. Like, I just don't understand like kind of what the end goal of what you're saying is, because it's like, okay, is the end goal of what you're saying to convert them to your side? Because no young person is going to look at that and be like, oh yes, this guy who's demonizing me and antagonizing me by, I don't know if he's calling the radical the Supreme Court nominee, which is like, that's hilarious to me. It's insane, right? Or if he's calling like the young people radicals. But this idea that like this could be efficacious in like pulling young people towards you, it's like, what? Do you think young people are going to look at that and be like, whoa, dude, this guy called me a radical and he's saying all this crazy stuff and that's really going to bring me in? I just don't really understand it. And blaming it on radical indoctrination and stuff is just a hilarious abdication of responsibility on your part. Obviously, the reason why they don't support you is because you don't support their policy positions. You're very, very socially conservative. I honestly, like, so I know that social issues, at least, from what I've learned in political science, social issues take precedence over economic issues in terms of personal beliefs, because you're socialized to believe certain social issues more than you are economic ones. You're not like raised at age 4 to be like, oh yeah, like communism bad or whatever. You learn that in school, but not like as a child. As a child, you do learn like racism and stuff like that because you're exposed to what your parents believe and stuff like that. And so that you are socialized for like being religious, being against gay people, things of that nature, right? Being pro-gay people, those are all like socialized at a very young age, like very childhood level. So that's going to end up trumping a lot of economic issues. So if you were to go like full left wing on like social issues, it might help you. But we see the Republicans are struggling on all fronts. They're obviously not going to do much on like, economic stuff, but even on the social front, they're just like really heavily going, right, really, really heavily on abortion, on this. And I'm seeing a lot of Republicans saying now, like, okay, we need to soften our stance on abortion. Even Donald Trump said it himself, right? I think a lot of that is him trying to position himself back into the mainstream to be like a more mainstream candidate now, which I think is kind of working against DeSantis, because I think DeSantis is fucking up. I think his strategy is let me out lunatic Trump himself. Your strategy shouldn't be to out lunatic Trump. You want to be the mainstream. You want to be the mainstream candidate. You don't want to be the crazy, newer, crazy Trump. You can't be that, right? So I think he's actually fucking up because he's going super fascist, like more and more fascist. So I think he's actually like losing heavily because of that. But it's pretty interesting to see them reeling in. It is very interesting. I did try like talking to some experts about, or at least one expert about like, oh, what is your kind of projections on what would happen in the future? Because the way that the trends look right now, it's like, I mean, the Republicans are screwed because if Gen Z are kind of taking over as kind of the influential group of voting, that's a big deal, right? Because Gen Z is going to continue to take over and over and over. And so it's like, whoa, Republicans have to adapt. So it'll be interesting to see, do Republicans adapt? Are they able to adapt? If so, are they going to take an adaptation of being more socially liberal? Are they going to hemorrhage religious voters as a result? Like, they're in a very fascinating sort of quandary or conundrum here. And so it'll be super fascinating to see what goes down with this. But the Gen Z stuff is dominating, especially what we're seeing over in Tennessee right now. So pretty interesting stuff. And I'll make sure to keep you guys updated on all the information I possibly can.